3,000 years ago, a young shepherd shows up to see the king and says he'll slay the giant. Saw no ad. Position available giant slayer wanted must have previous experience. Had no resume with his last job in the killing business or references in his field. Who anyway would never bleed anything bad. But if he knew this was his calling and he'd make history if the meeting went well, how did he almost blow it? Rejected at first and nearly sent back to sheep. The sling, the stone, the giant's fall we all recall. But how David turned this upside down interview right side up and got this killer job. Well, just because this is Sunday school doesn't mean I have to tell you a Bible story the way you know it and not my way. Welcome to Israel in the time of Prophet Samuel, when the main enemy is no longer the king of Egypt who wouldn't let our people go, or the Amalekite thugs who wouldn't let us live. The Philistines are a band of ex-Greek pirates who plundered the Aegean Sea until they found themselves on the Mediterranean shore of Canaan, where years later they look up at the Western Highlands and see us, tribes of new immigrants, shepherds and farmers who were doing so well that if only we could be subdued and conquered, could be taxed at a prime rate and our wealth redistributed. But even more than greed or envy, these Philistines won't let our people rule. They'd be happy campers if the land were ruled by the Eskimos, say, or the Hopis, or the Tutsis, like the Palestinians who for 2 decades didn't give a hoot or a holler under the yoke of the Jordanians. But now, us? These Philistines fear we'll impose our universal God on them, a God who disrespects their local gods they're loyal to, and who insists on a moral code that limits natural passions and desires. What planet is this God from? Down with his people, out with the Jews. But whatever the Philistine motive, they're killing us. A body count of 30,000 dead Israelites is in the air, and the rest of us can't help thinking about tomorrow. Who will live and who will die? Right after I immigrated several years ago during the Gaza War, I made my way to the Mount Herzl Cemetery for the burial of a young 20-year-old IDF soldier named Almog Shiloni, who'd been killed in an attack. After they lowered him into the grave, the army chaplain called out, "Almogi, when you're up in front of the Almighty, Almogi, tell him, enough already, enough." Or as we say in Hebrew, "Maspeak far, maspeak." So why should we have grieved any less back then, when the Philistines were about to invade our heartland and spill who knows how much more Jewish blood? So to prepare for the big battle ahead, our armies square off not far from the strategic western entrance to the Judean hills, where nearby today is the Beit Shemesh Mall. We dig in, each of us, on 2 sides of opposing hills that slope down to the Elah Valley with a brook running in between. You can see it from atop Tel Azeka, which is only a short 40-minute drive from here heading southwest. On one hill overlooking the valley, our camp, made up mostly of soldiers from the tribes of Judah and Dan, is well organized, with special zones for ordnance, training, and supply. But we have no cast iron to make swords, spears, and shields. While on the other hill, the Philistines can't seem to harness the power of their chariots, which don't exactly have all-terrain vehicle stickers. No surprise then when the Philistine chiefs regroup to powwow. "Mr. Chairman, I move that we change the war rules." lead with our strength, and end it all with a one-on-one contest. Hear, hear! Banish those Zionists. Send them back to Egypt. Let's pick Goliath for this task. He's ranked number 1. For the Philistines, then, this is a done duel. As big as a barn and armed to the teeth, their all-star champ Goliath looks down from his 12-foot height and calls out from across the valley terms he thinks are nothing if not noble.
No need for everyone to come out to fight me,
he says, invoking the politics of mercy. He wants to cut casualties, save lives. A great humanitarian. Send him to the UN. He continues.
If your warrior wins, we'll be your slaves. But if I win, you'll be slaves to us.
This is fair and square. He's a Greek warrior. They eat duels for breakfast. And since we know he aims to clinch this one-game playoff by leveraging his many years of experience in hand-to-hand combat, who wants to get killed by him and be responsible for a whole nation losing everything? So, to force us to come out to fight him then, Goliath comes out of his barracks every day to wage a campaign of psychological terror. For nearly 6 weeks, at sunrise and sunset, like clockwork, he interrupts us smack in the middle of our twice daily prayer.
Shema Yisrael,
Hear, O Israel,
Adonai Eloheinu,
the Lord is our God, the Lord alone.
Who will fight me?
He knows what he's up to. His spies told him it's a coded signal, an SOS to our God. Mayday, Mayday, come on down, save us from defeat. So he taunts us with obscenities that attack God's name, put us to shame, distort our judgment, give us a nervous breakdown, and destroy our will to fight. A verbal arsenal of threats and curses that some say would kill the Pope. So watching us suffer from this daily humiliation and the threat of losing our glory and independence, Goliath believes we're at the end of our rope, and that once we see he's invincible, our soldiers will bow down to the appearance of real power, lay down their bows and arrows, raise the white flag, and surrender themselves to slavery in Philistine factories, making weapons of mass destruction and Goliath statues for the public square. Our parents and grandparents will paint their pottery. Our daughters will be their whores. So what if King Saul offers a king's bounty for Goliath's head? More money than you could realize, tax-free. Plus the hand of the king's daughter in marriage, and call in the next 10 minutes, we'll throw in a kingdom to rule over maybe one day. But even with the promise of a fairy tale ending, nothing can overpower the panic of a people paralyzed by the sight of this Godzilla and the violence in his voice. I remember back in May 1967, when the surrounding Arab armies threatened every day to invade Israel and drive us into the sea. The cartoons were pretty scary, but it was the voice of Radio Cairo that set us on edge. Ladies of Tel Aviv, dress up pretty to prepare yourselves and give yourselves over when our handsome soldiers arrive. My Aunt Hannah said to my Uncle Meir, what happens if they come down from the hills across the valley into our house? What do I do? He said to her, pick up every knife you can. Now maybe Saul could have brought in 10 top contenders and given each one a menacing challenge each week until he's left with one lone survivor. Call it Master Warrior. But nobody's writing cover letters for this job until about 6 weeks in, when a young religious hipster who writes poetry and sings to his sheep leaves his flock back home in Bethlehem. Just for a couple of days, here's a bottle of milk to feed that little lambkin who won't nurse. He arrives at the front to see how his brothers are doing after all this time when the soldier's diet is basically bread alone and the canteen is out of stock. So while he drops off some power bars and clean socks, he too is riveted by the sight and sound of this giant on the rampage. Now, even if David is doing his own ground intelligence and analyzing his own military prowess to see what he can do for his country, what does David have going for him that the rest of us down at the front don't have? Even with all our medals and battle stripes and ribbons, can he see something we can't? Well, if he can, it's not because he went to West Point or took a correspondence course in giant fighting for 2 credits. David's been a mountain shepherd all these years on the steep slopes of the Judean hills, treading gingerly in single file, with spikes on his boots for crushing rattlers, and always ready to run after and rescue a stray goat or a sheep that ran into the ravine below, with its mudslides and flash floods and poisonous chokeberries and wolves and sheep rustlers without thinking it through first. As a mountain shepherd then, David's got foot speed and direction. Picture an NFL football receiver whose trail running gives him enough control to change directions on the spot without signaling his move. David's alert and vigilant, nimble and quick. He knows what it's like to be mobile, which is why he can see Goliath weighed down by his heavy armor, the way a sheep is weighed down by its fleece, especially when it falls over on its back and can't get up again. So if Goliath has appearances going for him, David's got the inner vision to see beyond appearances, a discerning eye, a first-class noticer. Over the mountains and down in the valleys, he's had ample time to look at the nighttime sky and get lost in the star fields, discover what's behind it all. To see what's not there is to begin to see everything. So hearing about this job opening then, David approaches the troops to open a conversation. He pumps everyone for details of the king's reward and sounds pretty cool when he calls out, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy the armies of the living God?" As a public rallying cry, it rallies the imagination in a flash. Since we know the Philistines share the Greek worship of the human body in its perfect natural state, naturally, the foreskin is their flag, so to speak. They despise our circumcision, and not only because they see it as the ugly mutation of their cosmic order, not to mention a perversion of children's rights, but the very symbol of our political challenge to them, they think. Embedded in the flesh of a baby boy 8 days after his birth, this covenant that God made with Abraham in Genesis seems to advertise, "To your seed will I give this land." To which the Philistines reply, "This is a lie. Drop dead, Jews. Your claim to inherit this land defies the laws of power. Might makes right. To win this land, win this duel." So David doesn't need to go out there and say, "I can handle this, guys." His mockery and his contempt for a Philistine who dares to defy the armies of the living God pictures David as a patriot out to avenge the spear in his nation's soul. So what if his older brother Eliab suspects that David's curiosity is motivated less by a thirst for news than a hunger for royal attention? "Go back to your chores," he tells David, as if David is Cinderella. But David knows better than to spill his beans. So he says to Eliab, in effect, "Now what, bro? I'm just shooting the breeze." But we know David's chat is building buzz. Who is this messenger boy down at the front? Where does he get his dashing patriotism in the face of a jealous older brother? Will he really be successful in taking this giant down? The network anchors break in. If he wins, will there be a new Jewish holiday? The Star of David is rising. The young shepherd is summoned to see Saul, King of Israel. Way back when, Saul was a farm boy, tall and handsome, had everything. By any standard, a very lucky man. But when the prophet Samuel proclaims his name and all cry, "Long live the king!" he's hiding out. He's modest. Thanks, but no thanks. It's not me. We mark our boundaries, set them in stone, and put up a sign saying, "Leave me alone." But once he's back on the farm, Saul sees a need for unity and for a warrior to lead us in battle. Acharai, we say in Hebrew, after me. Tell your tour guide to use it. Acharai, but don't tell him too often or he'll reply, Maspik far, maspik. Saul rises to the challenge, comes out of his shell, meets life head on, and builds a world-class army, ruthless in its defense of our people against enemies who want to kill us. If you want to see the headquarters of the Israel Defense Forces today, you know where you go to in Tel Aviv? The Boulevard of Saul the King. The bumper stickers back then read, Saul rules. Yes, a gallant leader. Until it goes to his head. Big time. He was such a natural commander that he saw success as his own doing. Who needed God? Even before Goliath came, the king decided which enemies should die and who he should let live, but he picked the wrong fight that got him into trouble. And I mean more than the Lord unfriending him on Facebook. He botched the battle with Amalek, a nation of robber nomads that took whatever was useful, looting and plundering, using brutal gang violence to rape and kidnap and ransom until it was on to the next, sucking the blood out of one tribe after another. Or as they say in the vampire movies, a slayer's life is simple. Want, take, have, move on. But when a whole group of goons becomes a killing machine without conscience, without any resemblance to anything decently human, it loses the right to live and breathe the same air we do on God's good earth. So God commands the king of Israel to go nuclear, to kill every man, woman, child, and animal of theirs without exception, without any arguments, without any appeals. But Saul won't listen. He rebels, and not out of any misplaced sense of mercy. Please. He spares what's useful to him, like their Royal Highness, King Agag. A professional courtesy. I'll save your butt. You save mine. Nice. He enables the king and queen of cruelty to conceive bloody killers for generations to come. But how does a king of Israel not understand that God's law trumps personal ethics and obey his command without even blinking? For the prophet Samuel, this is moral corruption, betrayal, treason. Since you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. You're fired. As soon as your replacement is ready, your history. Wow. In no way prepared for what hit him. King 1 minute, outlaw the next. King Saul is humiliated. Doomed. The Bible tells us he's possessed by an evil spirit. Demons of depression, hallucinations, nightmares. Day and night, banging in his head. Must peak far, must peak. David will be pitching himself to a king who is half mad. So here's where the action begins. It's been nearly 6 weeks since Goliath first appeared, ranting and raving. Day 41. As David nears the royal battle tent to audition for his new fighting role, he's actually already been called to the king's court before to cheer up Saul with his shepherd's harp, favoring him with a playlist of soothing tone poems that tell stories, depict scenes, paint inner portraits. David's lullabies, melodies, rhythms, and rhymes have already comforted the king and changed his mood every so often. You know, as Thoreau says, when I hear music, I fear no danger. I am invulnerable. I see no foe. So David should be feeling as if the odds are in his favor right now. The introduction's unnecessary, you would think. They know each other. Hey, Mr. Harp and Song Man, play a song for me. But that's not what happens. So what do you do when you're trapped with an interviewer who's out to lunch, who doesn't recognize you when he should, who's too preoccupied on his phone to look up, whose professional life is going downhill fast, or his son just announced he's quitting college to go live in a big glass dome with a bunch of people led by someone who calls himself He Who Is? Should his fears and anxieties stop you from getting the job? And in Saul's case, there's the onset of paranoia. He sees a rivalry the way many managers do when they meet people who are better than they are and a threat to their jobs. Does this faze our young shepherd David? Well, why should it? Ever since the prophet Samuel fired Saul and undertook this secret mission to Bethlehem to seek out and anoint the new king God picked, David knew that the holy oil on his forehead was only a heads up, so to speak, with the real call yet to come. So, if this looks like it's it, there's no way he can blow it, David thinks. Join me inside the royal battle tent where the meeting is now in progress. Don't lose heart. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. I'm your man, king. I want what's best for you, and what's best for you is me. But that doesn't sit well with the king. You're not able to go fight this Philistine. You're a youngster, and he's been a warrior since his youth. You've got no experience. He's trained in Spartan boot camps, fought in street gangs since he was 10, blood on his breath. You're going to end up looking like garbage in the dumpster after the cats got to it. Oh. So even though David was able to show off his moxie and gift of gab, he's turned down, rejected, and for good reason. He talks about himself without showing any evidence of why Saul should bring him on to slay the giant, without knowing what Saul wants to hear, much in the same way I often turn into a puppet that springs when the lid pops up, and showcase my well-practiced solo of cliches. They say, tell me about yourself. I want to advance my career, pursue my dreams, make a lot of money. I'd be great for this job. I'll be the best for this firm, and the most humble. All these mindless pitches without first knowing what my audience needs to hear. But without knowing that, how can I put my best foot forward and zoom in on what I and only I can offer? From David's appearance and pitch, you'd never know he has any experience. And then Saul tells him, you're going to be dead meat. So what's David to do? Should he throw up his hands and go back to Bethlehem? Should he tell everyone the interview was ridiculous, they don't know what they want, only to hear Eliab respond, I'm not going to tell you I told you so, fellow son of Jesse, dear brother, but you torched the family name? Or does David somehow know that interviewers can be deceived by appearances and decide to go for plan B? Well then, how does he show that he's wiser than his years and can overcome his youthful lack of warcraft with fighting skills in other life and death struggles like hand-to-hand combat, and show evidence of stamina, speed, and strength? Does he have a good story he can dash off with details of what he did well? Well, what good stories do we have when we look back? We're not even sure anymore of what we do well. especially today when it's harder to define success. When who gets credit for what's intangible and complex is often a coin flip. When knowing what we're worth and what we're good at is frequently a guess. How do we retell, reframe, and recycle our personal achievement stories in light of who we are today? And like David, make them come alive. My being a mountain shepherd and all is not just a job. To keep my flock alive, I fight like a warrior. One winter night, I put the sheep to sleep and myself was nodding off when suddenly I hear the yelp. I jump up like a jackrabbit, but the fog from the ice was too thick outside to see. So I follow this hollering sound with my ears until I stop in my tracks. The eyes of a mountain lion. The lion is calm, I see, doing what it's born to do. The yelp is from one of my lambs, its fleece hanging from the lion's jaws. So of course, I grab the mane and open the lion's mouth wide until the sheep drops down to the ground and runs like the devil. And that would have been that. End of story. Until I see the lion's torso arching up, the tail up, and the mouth open wide, baring its sharp teeth, ready to pounce on me. So you know the old lion tamer's trick to press the nerve connected to the jaws and keep the mouth wide open? That's when I whack his head until he's dead. Did the same thing next time around when the bear came. Now I'm not going to tell you these are going to be my deathbed entries of the greatest terrific moments of my life, but they come pretty close. 3,000 years later, you'll find on the wall of a Jackson Hole, Wyoming hunting lodge a plaque referring to a more deadly Rocky Mountain grizzly bear, which professional hunting guide C. Dale Peterson killed by first using his bare hands and teeth to pinch the jugular vein until it passed out. No blood to the brain. David tells his story to show he's a natural warrior, maybe even like King Saul. General Moshe Dayan says that David's civilian skills were perfect for killing a predatory human beast like Goliath. The self-confidence to confront the lion and snatch the sheep from the jaws of death. The cool head when the beast snarls at him. The capacity to think under pressure and spot the vulnerable points of the adversary. And finally, the courage to act fast in killing the beast in one fell swoop. And then also by killing the bear, he's a winner anywhere. So David milks this moment for all it's worth. Tying his experience now to the job he's interviewing for, David talks results. Both a lion and a bear has your servant struck down, and this uncircumcised Philistine will fare like them, for he has insulted the armies of the living God. And yet, David still doesn't get a handshake or a nod. Not even thanks much, keep in touch. Saul is simply silent, which means David knows he better think fast before he loses this chance to change the king's mind. Now here, the Bible or any of the David legends passed down to us over time don't tell us that David used this moment to pray. But what might he say? Lord of the starfields, galaxies, miracles, and wonder. I knew back in Bethlehem I'd bide my time till I'd wave my warrior skills like a banner in the wind. But now you're raising me up to fly on the wings of a storm cloud? What's with the king? Does he not like the way I look, the way I talk, dance? What more could he want from a man so sure of his courage, who proves he's a hero and ties it all back to the needs of your flock? Does he not know my shepherd is the Lord and we're in this together? You're on my side, I'm on yours. Did I say something I shouldn't have said? Did I leave something out? Give me a clue. What do I do? And then it happens. In the darkness of the king's silence, The young shepherd sees the light. He moves right then and there to rearrange what Saul sees. A shift in perspective, like in a film, a new camera angle, the radiance in David's face, his eyes glowing. What defines the David moment now is this fervent prayer from his mouth to God's ear. What King Saul hears now is this: "The Lord who saved me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will save me from the hand of this Philistine." Bingo! David's brought God back into the world, where he'd earlier pitched his offensive skills that addressed only the first part of the king's rejection, "You're but a youngster." Now, to show that he could survive a one-on-one duel with an enemy like Goliath, who'd been a warrior since his youth, David shows defensive skills as well. A heavenly shield will protect him. How does Saul react when only a few frames earlier he'd been stuck back in the days of bad calls, bad breaks, the whole ugly business of war? Crippled and wounded soldiers, mothers crying for their sons to come home. Must speak, Var, must speak. God, what he'd give to silence the inner turmoil of rage and ruin, repair the past, wipe the slate clean, and feel the fire one more time. Now, as if someone suddenly flips the right switch, David's prayer transforms him. Saul opens his eyes. In front of him now is a spiritually mature young man whose faith and gratitude as the source of his strength was also what Saul must have been seeking. And that David, in forging a strategic alliance with the highest power, has something that Saul himself might have laid claim to once, but never did: help from above. The irony here is in the super truth the king sees, like when we too face the impossible we never imagined. The king goes against the bidding of his own broken heart, picks the man who will replace him, and with him the whole house of Saul. He tells David, "Go for it, and may the Lord be with you." Okay, so we're on the battlefield now. Goliath is in full armor, 100 pounds of metal way down. His spear bigger than he is. And forget about giants and their blind spots. His shield bearer will stop any arrow from those directions. Though Goliath sees in front of him David's shepherd's staff and goes into a slow burn.
What? Am I a dog?
All his life he's heard those rumors running rampant the night he was conceived, that his mother slept with 100 men and a dog. And now this lie about his socially unacceptable body, exposed in front of everyone on live television? Unnerved by this mockery of his manhood and his mother, Goliath is distracted by David's sleight of hand. For in David's other palm is that weapon of choice, the same shepherd sling used to scare predators from attacking flocks. So if there's no weapon Goliath can see, he thinks this is going to be like taking candy from a baby. But like all loudmouth tyrants with blind spots when it comes to the Jews, the world first has to suffer his theology of contempt and trash talk that celebrates Jewish death with an upcoming banquet. He calls out to David,
Come to me, that I may feed your flesh to the birds of the air and the cows in the field.
But David is aware of his primetime audience around him. And so before he throws Goliath's words back in his face, he summons up the stark difference between the forces of evil and the forces of good. You come to me with a spear and a sword and a javelin, and I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. Now he counters Goliath's famous last words with a menu change for the banquet. He tells Goliath, no, you will be the one who will be the food for the birds. Wow. That Goliath will be the main course makes him also look up. Bad move. He displaces his helmet. It opens wide. All now see Goliath's head naked, vulnerable. Not a good time for this walking fortress to advance, but advance he does, this big man. For David, it's now or never. He bolts toward his foe and breaks, reaches for a smooth river stone without any edges jutting out to drag it down, puts it into a sling, and before the shield bearer knows what's flying, David whirls this missile like a fastball at Goliath's head. Bullseye! Falls down flat, sunk in his armor. Can't get up. So David runs to his fallen foe to retrieve his sword, but, oh Lord, it's stuck in its sheath. What to do? How is David going to finish him off? The fate of our people hangs in the balance. The shield bearer, Uriah the Hittite, a soldier of fortune who owes no allegiance to the Philistines or anyone else. So David cuts a deal. You get me that sword, and I'll get you a beautiful Jewish wife. You'll love her. Now, David lops off Goliath's head, raises it high for all the Philistines to behold what none thought would be possible, and along with Goliath's weapons, drags it to our camp. David has redeemed his people Israel. As David makes his way through the throng of spectators with the giant's head in his hand, there's a great sob of relief, a panic of uproarious joy for which it's hard to find a name in human speech. I remember right after the stupendous victory of the 1967 Six-Day War, a national concert marked the war's end, with Zubin Mehta conducting the Israel Philharmonic. My Aunt Gladys was in the audience at the time and recalls the opening, those moments right after the first chords of the national anthem, Hatikva. I hope you've seen how David's story is at the same time Israel's, like the Star of David rising now to wipe out the Goliaths of terror, nuclear mayhem, and global jihad, not to mention the lessons we teach the world on the ethics of war. Acharai. Or if we adopt this tale, each of us personally as our own, who among us doesn't have dreams that come to us slowly or appear suddenly in a flash, like a giant opportunity seemingly out of the blue? Like David's brother who brushes him off, too often do people who mean well convince us to flee before the chance of a lifetime. It's not for you, they say. But how do they know that? At any moment, visions can be destroyed or realized. Why let them rock your world and steal your joy? Which brings us finally to how we succeed when everything's stacked against us. David's interview with Saul inspires me to keep my ear to the ground, to learn what they're looking for these days, and then tell stories that show those skills and tie them back to what's needed. It's how I create for myself more choices than I have now and become freer to seek out my calling. Just because you've only been a farmer doesn't mean you can't be king, or that you cared for sheep doesn't mean you can't care for people. We're all called to care, but how much effort do we put into it? They say it's not the size of the man in the fight, but the size of the fight in the man. That instead of fleeing before the lions and bears and Goliaths of our lives, to let ourselves be tested, and in that way strengthen our faith and our calling all the days of our lives. And to always ask God why He gave me the skills I own and how to best use them. With His love, whatever happens is for the best. He's on my side. And if things don't work out the way I want, I'm on His side. I know who I am, and I know whom to trust. That's my David moment. Saul had no need to ask David why he wanted this job. He granted David's wish because David honored his God. Thank you for attending Sunday school and for giving me the chance to serve you, and with gratitude also to the One above who gave us all that great literature and wisdom in that very same book that brought us all to the land of the Bible. Thank you for visiting Israel. Look around you while you're here and when you go home, and you as well will see these too are days of miracle and wonder. Go for it, and may the Lord be with you. You've been a great group. Thank you. We have time for some questions. Yes, you, sir.
I didn't see your version of the story in the Bible. Did you make most of this up?
That